A silver sedan pulls away from a curb. A box is left on a doorstep, wrapped in plain brown paper, no return address. 4 words are written across the top in a mother's handwriting: "Don't make a scene." Angela Turner almost obeyed. She'd been obeying that sentence her whole life. It had shown up at graduations, at holidays, at her own wedding, always calm, always reasonable sounding, always meant to keep her quiet. She almost left the box untouched on the porch. But something about seeing it there, waiting for her like it had been planned for weeks, made ignoring it feel more dangerous than opening it. So she carried it inside, set it on the kitchen counter, and cut the ribbon. The first thing she saw was a photograph of her 8-year-old son, Nathan, asleep in his own bedroom, a room her parents had never been invited into. Beneath it, a duplicate key to her house. Beneath that, a thick envelope stamped with the letterhead of a family court attorney. Her hands were shaking before she read a single word of it. She called 911 before she finished opening the rest. Welcome back to Lineage of Lies. What you're about to hear isn't just a story about a dangerous package left on a doorstep. It's a forensic case study in how control gets inherited. Passed down like a family trade, refined over decades, disguised so completely as love that the people living inside it don't recognize it until it's sitting open on their kitchen counter. 11 years earlier, 22-year-old Angela stood in her parents' kitchen holding a graduate school acceptance letter. She remembers the exact weight of the envelope in her hands, the way she'd practiced saying the words out loud in the car. Her father, Frank, took the letter before she finished the sentence. He folded it twice and said the family had already invested enough in her experiments. Her mother, Nancy, didn't argue with him. She cried, quietly, until Angela agreed to stay. For a decade, Angela told herself that decision had been hers. It was easier than admitting it had been taken from her in under 5 minutes, standing in a kitchen she'd grown up in. She didn't know yet that the letter still existed. Filed away, along with a follow-up note from the admissions office asking if she needed more time to decide. Nancy had called them herself, weeks later, pretending to be her daughter, and withdrawn the application for good. Don't make a scene wasn't a new sentence. It was the family's oldest instruction, worn smooth from decades of use. Angela was only now hearing it clearly for the first time. Officer Ramirez arrived within minutes and began cataloging the contents of the box, laying each item out on the counter like pieces of a puzzle no one had asked to solve. A digital recorder. A flash drive. 6 more photographs. A child's wooden train. And a stuffed bear Angela recognized immediately, one that had disappeared from Nathan's room 4 months earlier, after their last visit to her parents' house. When Ramirez lifted the bear, a familiar floral scent drifted into the kitchen. Her mother's perfume. The same scent that used to linger outside her bedroom door when she was 16, back when Nancy had a habit of finding things Angela thought she'd hidden. The photographs were worse. Nathan eating breakfast at their own kitchen island. Nathan photographed through the chain-link fence behind his school. The dates spanned almost 2 months. In one image, a reflection in the window caught part of a stranger's face, a man neither Angela nor her husband, Mark, recognized. That was the moment Mark walked through the front door, saw the uniforms, and went pale. 3 weeks earlier, Frank had approached him outside his office, calm and almost friendly, and asked him to sign an emergency guardianship plan. In case, Frank said, you and Angela are ever both hospitalized. When Mark refused, Frank had only smiled and said, you may not get to make that decision. It was the same tone Mark would hear again, weeks later, in a courtroom. The sound of someone who had never once considered losing. Mark hadn't told Angela. He thought raising it would reopen wounds she'd spent years trying to close. He didn't understand yet that silence was exactly what this family's system depended on. A sweep of the house turned up more. A camera hidden inside a smoke detector, angled at the kitchen table. A second device tucked behind a hallway vent near Nathan's room. Faint scratch marks around the lock on the back door. The same door Frank had helped install a new lock on the year before, back when they were still on speaking terms. Then came a third evidence bag, a memory card labeled with Angela's name and a date from 6 years earlier, the week Nathan was born. It held 6 years of documentation. A cancelled dentist appointment, logged as neglect. A babysitter arriving 10 minutes late, logged as a child left unsupervised. One glass of wine at a holiday dinner, logged as a substance concern. Her parents hadn't been documenting danger. They had been quietly building a file, one ordinary moment at a time, waiting for the right day to use it. Detective Lena Cho took over the case and moved quickly. A serial number on the hidden camera led investigators to a local security retailer, where store footage identified the buyer, Calvin Rhee, a private investigator whose license had been suspended for illegal tracking 2 years earlier. The same face from the reflection in Nathan's school photo. Phone records showed dozens of calls between Rhee and a number registered to Frank's consulting business. Attorney Melissa Grant found the deeper fraud buried in the paperwork. A forged letter from a therapist Angela had never met used a real license number attached to the wrong name. A notarization stamp on a document bearing Mark's forged signature turned out to be genuine, because it had been reported stolen 3 months earlier. Someone had assembled an entire case file out of stolen fragments of real identities, betting no one would look closely enough to notice the seams. Mark sat across from Detective Cho and finally said the thing he'd been swallowing for 3 weeks. "I should have told her the day it happened." Cho didn't reassure him. She just opened a notepad and asked him to start from the beginning. He gave her everything. Every conversation with Frank, every detail he'd once dismissed as harmless because admitting its weight meant admitting he'd chosen silence over his own wife. Ramirez's body camera footage confirmed the timeline that mattered most. Police had responded to evidence Angela reported, not a disturbance she'd caused. For the first time, the family's private machinery was operating in front of outside witnesses who couldn't be managed with a phone call. Frank and Nancy filed an emergency guardianship petition anyway, claiming Angela had vanished with Nathan during a psychological breakdown. It was a mistake. Filing forced a hearing, and a hearing forced everyone into the same room, in front of people who couldn't be talked out of what they were about to see. Their attorney stood first and called the box a clumsy attempt to share family records, and the photographs proof of grandparents worried about neglect. Every violation, reframed as concern. Every lie, reframed as misunderstanding. Then Melissa placed the original, uncropped photographs beside the doctored versions attached to the petition. The image labeled Nathan wandering alone outside school, uncropped, showed Mark standing 3 feet away, just out of frame. The image labeled Angela intoxicated showed a birthday toast surrounded by 6 other adults holding identical glasses. The judge asked Nancy directly why the images had been altered. She stood before her own attorney could stop her. In front of the judge, the court reporter, and Angela's extended family seated in the gallery, she said it plainly: "A mother does what is necessary when her daughter refuses help." It wasn't an accident, and it wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a confession, delivered in her own voice, in a room full of witnesses who would carry it out the door with them and repeat it to everyone who asked. The judge denied the petition, issued a permanent no-contact order, and referred the forged documents to the fraud unit for prosecution. Frank reached for Nancy's arm, but it was already too late. Everyone in that room had heard her. There was no dramatic showdown afterward, no shouting match in a parking lot. Just paperwork, the way most systems of control actually end. Frank pled to burglary, stalking, and forgery, and received a multi-year prison sentence. Nancy pled to conspiracy and attempted court fraud, receiving probation under a permanent protective order. Rhee cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced charge. The family house was sold to cover legal fees and restitution. The nonprofit board Frank had chaired for a decade removed him within the week. On sentencing day, the courtroom was smaller than the one before, mostly empty, no gallery left to perform for. Nancy wore the same pale blue she'd worn to the hearing months earlier, though it hung looser on her now. She turned to her daughter and asked one question: was it worth destroying everything? Angela answered quietly, "I didn't destroy it. I opened the box." A year later, she requested one item back from evidence. Not the photographs. Not the recorder. Just the card. Don't make a scene. She framed it beside the original graduate school acceptance letter, recovered from her father's files, yellowed at the edges but still bearing her name. At 33, she applied to a local graduate program of her own choosing. When the acceptance email arrived, she read it out loud to Mark and Nathan at the kitchen table. No one took it from her hands. A lineage of lies doesn't end with a confrontation. It ends the moment someone stops protecting the silence that was protecting everyone else. Every device her parents used to control Angela, the hidden cameras, the recorder under the passenger seat, the memory card filled with 6 years of ordinary life twisted into evidence, was built to capture her without her knowing. In the end, it was the unedited record that set her free. That's the lesson to take with you. The truth doesn't need you to raise your voice. It just needs a record that can't be altered. So if this story hit you, hit that record button on subscribe, and record your bell so you don't miss the next case file.